If there's one word in the oil patch which makes everyone sit up and pay attention, it's the word blowout. A blowout is simply an uncontrolled flow of gas or oil. The gas begins to expand and work its way upwards. If not controlled, the gas bubble could cause a blowout.
Welcome to Good Morning West Texas with Betty King. Brought to you by the shop.
The International Energy Agency says the United States is going to pass Russia as the world's top oil producer by the end of this year. And a lot of that oil, and natural gas as well, comes from...
So the United States is in the middle of really a new kind of fossil fuel boom. And we're just starting to understand the impact that has. I'm Zach Toombs. I'm a reporter at Newsy. Over the past few years, we've seen oil and gas drilling in the U.S. breaking all kinds of records, going way up. The amount of oil produced in the U.S. has been climbing pretty consistently. It just became the top producer of oil in the world, over Russia, over Saudi Arabia. On natural gas production, the U.S. has been at the top for a while, and that's only going up from there, just steadily rising. That ramp up in production is partly due to new technology and something called hydraulic fracturing, or fracking. That's helped companies unlock this whole new layer of oil and gas trapped inside shale rock. Now, once they get into that shale layer, they basically inject water and chemicals to create cracks in the rock that lets them pull up the oil and gas they find there. That's helped create a new surge for oil and gas that the industry calls the shale revolution. So it was fracking that made this boom possible, but for the first time, it's really foreign demand and exports, not U.S. demand, that's driving all this new drilling. More oil and gas has meant more money for the industry, and in many places it means more jobs and more tax revenue for local governments. But in places where drilling overlaps with where people live, we know there's a health risk. What we don't know is just how big of a risk it is and for how many people. This new fossil fuel boom brings up a lot of questions about public health, about profits, and about the climate. Our goal was to follow this oil and gas from where it's pulled up out of the ground to wherever it ends up and see what the impact is. But Newsy is just one of a few newsrooms, including the Center for Public Integrity, the Associated Press, and the Texas Tribune, all teaming up to dig into this fossil fuel boom, to see what caused it and what it means for the U.S. and for the world.
Yeah, sure, if you wouldn't mind. Local is willing to try to give her name.
So I'm Kia Collier. I'm a reporter at the Texas Tribune. I focus on energy and environmental issues. We're trying to tell people about a massive oil boom that's going on in West Texas and New Mexico in an oil play called the Permian Basin. This oil boom is, by many measurements, bigger than any other oil boom before it.
Oil and gas production has ramped up significantly the past couple of years. The Permian is the epicenter of that latest oil rush. Now you have about 467 active rigs in the Permian Basin, and that's up from a few dozen in 2016. You see every city council agenda, there's, a request to permit wells within the city limits. That's a new thing. That's a very new thing.
I have to imagine there are some concerns as fast as the industry is moving with regulation, with safety for people who live around these sites.
Yeah, I mean, oil and gas production has massive consequences for the environment. You also have emissions, air emissions, which I would say is, kind of the biggest environmental consequence maybe of oil and gas drilling. State environmental and energy regulators are openly friendly to industry, and they view it as their duty to permit these wells as quickly as possible. They generally are good about responding to complaints and investigating them, but they don't have the staffing to go out and inspect all these wells, especially, there's so many of them. But out here, people are reticent to complain against the industry. The overwhelming sentiment is, this is good for the economy and the benefits outweigh the costs, and it will deal with the costs. And certainly it is a huge economic boon.
West Texas, our last frontier, they're turning it into an industrial zone.
Oh yeah, I see it. So you can't see it with the human eye, but through this camera you can see through infrared. So that black plume that I'm seeing is methane. What else?
Volatile organic compounds like benzene, toluene, harmful chemicals that we don't want to be standing here breathing.
So if we stay here long enough, or for the people who live around sites like this, what does that mean? What does that do?
Well, it's going to be harmful to their health. They could have upper respiratory issues, asthma. I mean, it's the same health issues we see everywhere.
So just in the past year, what changes have you seen from the oil and gas industry?
They're just poking holes everywhere at a very frenzied pace. And a lot of this is going to be exported to other countries. We're sacrificing our air, people's health, their quality of life, so that the oil and gas industry can ship overseas the oil and gas and make a profit. Industry can go into an area and put an oil and gas facility literally in someone's backyard. And when they start having health impacts, or they just complain about these horrible odors all the time, we can take this camera and show them that it actually is the oil and gas industry, and they can't deny it, because seeing is believing. And so we're holding the industry and the regulatory agencies accountable.
Environmental organizers like Sharon Wilson take that footage and show it to state regulators to try and get them to take some action around these emissions. Wherever we see these underground layers of shale, oil, and gas, we see more drilling and more emissions. That's the case in Texas, but also in states like New Mexico and Colorado. And state air monitoring across all of them is pretty spotty. So as this new drilling boom has ramped up, we're seeing citizens like Sharon Wilson going out into the field to monitor, but we're also seeing some scientists at federal agencies like NOAA, which studies the atmosphere, also going out into the field and really filling in the gaps and monitoring emissions.
So we're ready to roll?
I just have to get a short power, but yeah.
We are like detective. We drive around the oil and gas field and we're looking at real-time readings of benzene. And when we see very big hits, we investigate and look at what's upwind of us, and that will tell us where there's a source of benzene. So my name is Gabi Petron. I work at NOAA in the Global Monitoring Division, where we study greenhouse gases globally, but we also look at regional emissions of greenhouse gases, and specifically in the past few years, I've looked at methane emissions and volatile organic compounds emissions from oil and gas operations. From earlier work, aerial work that we did in 2012, we noticed that there's a lot of benzene over the oil and gas field that's not accounted for in the state inventory. So what we've been looking at in the past year is monitoring levels of methane and other natural gas markers like ethane, as well as air toxics, as we are looking at well pads that are being drilled, fracked, and in early production phase. So we saw definitely a plume from this pad with the flare. Here we're going to be able to see the pollution probably pooling and accumulating near the site. We're looking at different types of gases that have different impacts. When we look at a greenhouse gas like methane, we're looking at decadal to century to millennia impacts on climate. That's the methane story. And when we look at even smaller scales, closer to operations, we are interested in understanding health impacts that are related to air toxics emissions. Benzene is a known carcinogen. Some of the other gases can be irritants to the lungs or the eyes and the throat. So we have experts that are working with us that are better able than us to relate the atmospheric ambient levels that we detect with what the potential impacts are on people's health.
Colorado is one of the most prolific areas of oil and gas development in the country. One of our most active areas of oil and gas development is just to the northeast of Denver. I'm Lisa McKenzie. I've been studying the health effects and the health implications of developing oil and gas resources in residential areas for about 9 years now. We've now have quite a bit of data showing that the oil and gas sites can emit hazardous air pollutants like benzene. And there are quite a few studies out now that show people with certain health effects are more likely to be living near these oil and gas sites. And some of these health effects are associated with these chemicals. They include things like childhood leukemia and preterm births and some other adverse birth outcomes. The data on the health effects of benzene in human populations is pretty clear. That's from occupational studies that have been done. What we found was that people living closest to the well sites and within 500 feet of the well sites had a higher risk for chronic and acute health effects. Respiratory effects and neurological effects are the main health effects that we would expect to be associated with these air pollutants. Their cancer risk was 8 times EPA's upper threshold for cancer risk. So what we'd like to know is really what the level of benzene is that people are being exposed to in their homes.
Now we know that these emissions are coming off of any site that's actively pulling up oil and gas, like a rig or a pump jack or a site that's flaring. And we know that these emissions can make people sick. So the big question for us was, if we take the research on high health risk areas around drilling and compare that to US Census data on where people live, how many people could be at risk? We found data on where these wells are across the country. Now, this is the first time that anyone has compared the growing research on health risks around drilling to population data at this scale. The studies we're looking at show the health risk starts to increase for people living within 2,000 feet of a drill site. Then there's that higher risk zone for cancer within 500 feet. Our new analysis estimates more than 1.4 million people live in that zone nationwide. We see that drilling overlaps with population in states all over the country. That includes Texas, where we estimate as many as 480,000 people live within that 500-foot high-risk zone. And it includes Colorado, where we estimate 27,000 people live in that zone. Now, there are rules that are supposed to protect people from this kind of thing. They're called setback rules, and they determine how close drilling can come to where people live. But they're set at the state and local level, so they're different all over the country. Now, both Midland, Texas, and the state of Colorado have setback rules that are supposed to keep drilling at least 500 feet away from where people live. But there are loopholes. So, for example, a company can get an exception from a local government that lets them drill closer, or old wells can be grandfathered in. So that's part of the reason there could be more than 1 million people nationwide living in that high-risk zone. Basically, the shale revolution has changed drilling and put a lot of new drills into residential areas. But from state to state, the rules on setbacks and other safety measures haven't changed with the times. And that can put people in a dangerous spot.
It was a beautiful home on a corner lot with mountain views.
We were a little hesitant at first because we hadn't lived out of town before like that. And once we got up there, I think we really enjoyed that feeling of being kind of out of town, not so much in the congestion that goes on.
So we were all living together up there. Myself and Kyle and Juan and Amber and Gabriella, my grandbaby, who was, when she moved in, almost 2. When we moved up to Frederick, we actually had Amber's baby shower up there. And it was really beautiful and small town, really quiet, peaceful. Then we started getting notices about them fracking up there. And that's kind of where it all started. And that fracking site went up so fast. It was really fast. We thought, wow, it's really close to our house, but, you know, we really didn't think that much about it.
Tirsa would call me almost every night and tell me, you know, how just absolutely miserable it was to live across the street from an active fracking site.
There'd be this really strong smell in the air, and it would make me have headaches. I don't know if you've ever smelled like really strong nail polish remover. That's kind of how it smelled. Like really, it was just really a strong, sweet kind of smell. It was weird. So Amber, she had been calling in at work because she was having headaches a lot. That was in September, because she was diagnosed September 9th of 2014. They had us all come in, and they said she had 2 weeks left to live. Her bone marrow was 90% full of leukemia cells. And I just walked out, and I went outside of the hospital, and I just sobbed because I knew it was bad.
It was kind of hard to really just kind of let any of that sit in, you know, because I thought I have a really young daughter. You know, that's all I really thought about. Is my kid's gonna grow up without a mom? And that's not what I wanted. Sorry. That's where they decided to do their fracking. And this is where we lived, right across the street from it. We moved in September 2013. And then we lived up there until about September of 2014. So my health problems started in early September, if not later August. I started, noticing more things, like I was getting bruises and I was becoming really tired. My bones really hurt. I was 29 when I was diagnosed. And the doctor up there said it was, interesting because this is an old man's cancer, that's what they call it. Because it's AML, it's acute myeloid leukemia.
It was a couple nights, I think, after she was diagnosed. I was sitting up at night and I just Googled AML and benzene came up. And I was just like, I knew. I don't think I could have anybody convince me anything else other than it was where we lived.
I never felt sick or anything until this came around. I've been back at my job for a year and a half now. I still have a lot of, somewhat issues. And there's things that can pop up at any time, but I feel way better than what I did before. And I'll take it.
Following American fossil fuel means following this expanding network of pipelines across the country. And a lot of those pipelines end up at the Gulf Coast. Now, the production boom has been big, but the boom in exports has been even bigger. Out of the increase in U.S. oil and gas production over the past few years, virtually all of that has been sold and shipped abroad. Terminals along the coast that used to be for importing have switched to exporting. So that makes the Gulf Coast really a launching point for American fossil fuels headed overseas.
Now what you're going to see behind you here is what we call refinery row. You've got three major refineries here. You have Valero, you have Citgo, and you have Flint Hills, part of the Koch family.
So this port is playing a big role in the global changes in the energy market right now.
We are. Our customers are setting the stage to be global players.
As far as raw crude oil, Port of Corpus Christi is the #1 by a significant margin.
Since 1950s have we been a net exporter of energy in the America. Now this port alone is producing over half its volume of export crude to international markets. So we're creating not only a numerous amount of jobs, but sending all our energy to overseas markets.
Cheniere is building a facility here. Can you talk about that shift from import facilities to export facilities over the past couple of years?
The demand for natural gas across the world is tremendous, and it's only going to keep getting bigger. When the LNG facility Cheniere comes online here in the next coming several months, we're going to be able to actually start moving that liquefied natural gas to those markets into Europe and to Asia.
So the region you see here, it's kind of this blank canvas, if you will. This is where most of the major entities, energy companies, midstreamers are looking to develop in this particular area.
So just like in West Texas, the fossil fuel boom here brings a lot of new jobs, almost 800 just in Corpus Christi alone. And then there are thousands of more temporary jobs to build out all these new facilities. But just like around drilling, there's really another side to this success story, because for decades, refineries and processing plants all along the coast have put out a similar mixture of greenhouse gases and air toxics. And as exports have ramped up, so has activity at these refineries. Port Arthur is one of the towns surrounded by these refineries. And here, the health impact is well known. it has a cancer rate 40% higher than the rest of Texas.
This was Burger King.
Right.
Yeah, this is the Burger King structure. Old school Burger King. We have 10 shrimp, the boiled shrimp, and 2 crab.
10 shrimp and 1 vengeance. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And that's what else come with that? That's about it.
You want corn, sausage, potato add-on?
Yeah, let me have the corn and sausage.
Okay.
Ah, see that? Look at that. Don't that look good?
That looks great.
Very tasty.
So you grew up in Port Arthur?
Grew up here. Born and raised right here in Port Arthur. Grew up going crabbing. I remember what it smelled like here. It always smelled like rotten eggs, you know, the odors.
So you grew up with those emissions, with that rotten egg smell?
Mm-hmm. But we didn't think twice about it because it was just a norm. When I came back from back home from the military after I got out in 1984, downtown Port Arthur was dilapidated. We had white flight out of Port Arthur, I think, in the late 70s.
Did you notice something was off when you saw people with cancer, when you saw people with respiratory problems?
Well, yeah. Once I met Mr. Alfred Dominique, and I went to a couple of meetings he had invited me to that was dealing with environmental justice. He said, well, these plastics are dumping into the air. It's impacting our air quality. It's killing us because they're dumping sulfur dioxide in the air. They're dumping benzene. And I told him, I said, well, I always knew that, you know, it stunk. It didn't smell good. I said, but I didn't know, you know, just how bad it was. He said, yeah, what you smell is poison. So you telling me that benzene is a carcinogen, 1,3-butadiene is a carcinogen, and yet it's all in our air in tons every day. All right, we're gonna go ahead and hook it up now. All right. What's the one that goes inside? This one, you got it? Every chemical has a fingerprint, and the computer that is hooked up to is able to identify exactly what that particle is and how many parts per million is coming through that light at any given time. Ordinarily, what we would pick up on the UV hound, is sulfur dioxide, that's always a big one. Benzene, which is a known carcinogen. This helped me to raise the alarm and show that we at least have a problem whenever I'm able to pick up some readings, and then it puts the state into high gear to come and either prove me right or prove me wrong. That's Prince Hall Housing Project.
And just a few hundred feet behind us, Industry Row.
Right.
Here. I mean,
thousands and thousands of barrels of oil per day have been produced there since the 60s.
And this refinery is one of the biggest.
That is the largest oil refinery in the Northern Hemisphere, Motiva. Once that bitumen is processed here, it's processed to be sent overseas. It's not processed here to benefit U.S. citizens whatsoever. Many of the people in this area are moderate to low income, and that's rightfully so, because there's not a lot of folks that want to live next to oil and gas productions, because it stinks, it's not healthy, and we all know it. If you're going to have clean burning gasoline, and the only way you get gasoline is from crude oil, all the impurities that came out of that crude oil has to go somewhere. We're the sacrifice zone. Those impurities are going into my air, my grandkids' air, my grandmother's air, and everybody in this town. Port Arthur, Texas is considered the sacrifice zone.
So on the drilling side of this fossil fuel boom, it was really new technology that helped kick that off. But it's a different kind of innovation that's allowed companies to start exporting all this natural gas overseas. That's the process of turning natural gas, which is obviously a gas, into a liquid. Basically, by making the gas really cold, they're able to liquefy it and pack a lot more of it into containers, which can then be sold and shipped abroad as liquefied natural gas, or LNG. Now, when people talk about the oil and gas industry's impact on the climate, they're usually talking about carbon dioxide, or CO2. Natural gas puts out a lot less CO2 than other fossil fuels, which is something that the companies producing and selling natural gas and LNG like to talk about a lot.
This energy source carries tremendous benefits for consumers and the environment.
It's plentiful, secure, and all-American.
Think of gas molecules as tiny, powerful, transparent wizards.
But natural gas is not magic. Yes, it produces less CO2 than coal and less than gasoline from crude oil, but it puts out a lot more of a different kind of greenhouse gas called methane, which natural gas is almost entirely made out of. Methane only makes up about 1/10 of global greenhouse gases, but it's 25 times more powerful than CO2 at trapping heat. And a 2018 study actually showed that methane leaks from natural gas production were 60% higher than the US government thought they were. And that can have a big effect on the world's climate.
Greenhouse gases are gases that are in the atmosphere, and they are able to absorb heat and re-emit heat. So they act like a blanket that you put around the Earth. And the more greenhouse gases you have in the atmosphere, the thicker the blanket. They are trapping the heat that the Earth's surface is emitting towards space. Since pre-industrial time, CO2 levels have increased in the atmosphere by almost 50%. So we've gone from 280 ppm pre-industrial to 406 ppm in 2018. When you look at methane, it's even a bigger increase. We've gone from less than a ppm to around 2 ppm methane nowadays. The levels we're seeing now, especially in terms of CO2, have not been seen since 3.6 million years ago. We can say that about 3/4 of the climate change we are experiencing today and will experience can be attributed to an energy system that's reliable on fossil energy. 2016, just 2 years ago, was the warmest year on record. The past 4 decades have been the warmest in modern times, and we've seen that every decade in the recent past have been warmer than the previous one. We have optimistic scenarios in terms of climate change mitigation, which call for a quick reduction in greenhouse gases, especially CO2 emissions. And there are some scenarios that are more like business as usual, where the emissions are kept unabated. And we see that there's a very big difference in what the final result will be. So in this next scenario, that's business as usual, where there's no abatement in greenhouse gases emissions at all. We are way beyond 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And these are huge increases for society and ecosystem to react to and adapt to in such a short time. So everything is pretty much getting very, very dark here.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 27th World Gas Conference. We're bearing witness to this astonishing energy miracle.
This huge boom is unique in that it's really, about this new marketplace. When you're really looking at places like West Texas, the Permian Basin, also in New Mexico, you're really talking about a boom that is serving exports. This is oil and gas that is being, sent abroad, overseas. I'm Jenny Zhao. I'm a reporter at the Center for Public Integrity. I report on the environment, specifically climate change, and the fossil fuel industry. So it's, 1973, we've got the Arab oil embargo crisis, and basically what this led to was a shortage of fuel in the United States. You had gas prices surging, you had these long lines at the gas stations, and it basically leads to this whole movement to conserve crude oil. So by 1975, you've got Congress essentially putting in place a ban on crude oil exports. It was all about conserving what you have for the American people. And for decades, it kind of went unchallenged until around 2008 when fracking really took off. And that's the only time when you start to hear the oil and gas groups like the American Petroleum Institute start to suggest that this old ban that was put in place back in the 1970s, maybe you should throw it out. And around 2013, you see maybe under a dozen companies lobbying on the crude oil export ban. And then a year to 2 years later, that number grows to 300 lobbyists on this, sort of converging on Capitol Hill. But you also had a lot of people in the Obama administration who also pushed for it. Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz, which was an Obama appointment, he was one of the first people after the American Petroleum Institute to also say the crude oil export ban was, this old relic of the past and it's sort of outdated, and shouldn't we rethink this policy? They kind of still wanted to keep their climate legacy, but they also still wanted to keep the drilling going because the Obama administration was so gung-ho about natural gas. And in order to get natural gas, you also get oil. So you kind of had to have both. People on the Hill, Senator Murkowski, Senator Heitkamp, both from oil drilling states, insert a provision in that year's budget that would essentially undo decades of this ban on crude oil exports. And it makes the U.S. part of the global energy marketplace in a way that it's never been before. And it's also a great business opportunity because you're talking about profits and you're talking about a handful of companies that are able to export this stuff to countries abroad. The U.S. government has essentially become a pitchman for the global natural gas industry. And you've got folks like Energy Secretary Rick Perry visiting India, visiting Poland, and going to these countries and essentially telling them, you should buy American natural gas, helping essentially a handful of companies that are the only ones right now that can actually export natural gas. And the company that benefits a lot from this is Cheniere.
Its largest shareholder is a billionaire named Carl Icahn. Hi, I'm Tyson Slocum. I'm the director of the energy program with Public Citizen. Carl Icahn not only is an active investor and owner of critical fossil fuel infrastructure, but for almost a year served as a top advisor to the President of the United States on energy and regulatory policy. So there is a lot of financial benefit to Carl Icahn's LNG export company to the initiatives that Trump has announced. We've seen Carl Icahn's company join Trump administration officials on excursions to China where an agreement was made to facilitate more liquefied natural gas exports from Louisiana to China. By emboldening the oil and gas industries, you're increasing their ability to finance more lobbyists and make sure that U.S. energy policies are oriented towards the self-interest of the oil and gas industry. And the fear I have is that we are looking at investment and government policy decisions today to build out natural gas infrastructure to stick around for the next 40 or 50 years. And once you build new pipelines, the owners of those new pipelines do not want to see those pipelines become irrelevant in just a few years.
So it was the Obama administration that lifted the export ban and really opened the door for U.S. oil and gas being sold abroad. But it's truly been the Trump administration that has taken this fossil fuel boom to a whole other level.
We're here today to usher in a new American energy policy, one that unlocks millions and millions of jobs and trillions of dollars in wealth. Powered by new innovation and technology, we are now on the cusp of a true energy revolution.
From the start, Trump surrounded himself with energy advisors who who own parts of the oil and gas industry and stood to profit from weaker regulations. People like Carl Icahn and Harold Hamm. And the administration just started going through all these regulations the industry didn't like, either pushing them off or getting rid of them completely. One of the biggest changes was that they made it a lot easier for energy companies to release methane and other emissions into the air. Now that saves companies time and money because they don't have to worry about monitoring their emissions as much, but it also ups the risk for problems with public health and the climate. The Trump administration has also been aggressively selling oil and gas abroad, especially from Cheniere, whose profits are up more than 10 times over the past few years. And as more money comes in for the oil and gas industry, these companies are putting more money out there into political battles all across the country. At the federal and state level, these companies are putting a lot of money into fighting regulations, and usually they win.
Colorado is all about people, friends and neighbors, families and community. We're all together in making this a great place to live. Proposition 112 is going to hurt everybody across our state. It'll eliminate as many as 43,000 jobs in the first year alone. Let's come together to protect Colorado. Join me in voting no on 112.
Hello, how are you? Good. Hey, Chris. Hey, Bob. How are you?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
We can just stay out here really quick. Yeah, we're just stopping by. I'm just walking around letting people know about the setbacks for oil and gas that's going to be on the ballot. Have you heard of the
2,500 foot?
Yeah, 2,500 foot setbacks. Today, I believe I have 38 doors to hit. Proposition 112 provides a 2,500 foot buffer between homes, schools, and water sources and any new oil and gas drilling in the state of Colorado. We made it a statewide ballot initiative to protect all people, not just here in Broomfield, not just in Weld County, not just in Erie, but statewide.
You know, I've thought some about the health aspects, but I guess the economic side is the part where things are a bit more wishy-washy. Yeah. So I want to make sure I have the facts on that part.
You have the full support of this House.
Awesome.
And we will vote.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you.
When does voting start?
Early October. Thank you. Bye.
Go Broncos.
Yes.
Woo!
All right. You ready to rock your Tuesday? Gonna do your spelling test today. Maybe right before your test, look at the ones you had a hard time on. All right. You go ahead, Bean.
Not too bad.
Yes. It's exhausting fighting $1 billion industry. I'm hoping that we're serving not just Coloradans, but those around the world. You know, fossil fuels needs a clear boundary put on them, otherwise they won't put boundaries on themselves.
I'm Mitch Joliker with the latest from Denver 7. The polls are open for this year's midterm election. Voters in Colorado will be deciding on 13 initiatives.
Oil and gas development is one of the bigger items on this year's ballot. 112 in particular would increase the distance new drill rigs need to be from homes and schools.
Let's break this down for you. A yes vote on Prop 112 means you want to increase the setback for new wells to 2,500 feet from homes, schools, hospital buildings, and also, quote, vulnerable areas. A no vote keeps these regulations the same.
This is a long one this year. So yes on 112 for safer setbacks for oil and gas. I've been waiting quite a few months to fill that bubble out. That felt really good.
Are you going in to vote?
Trying to drop off a ballot somewhere.
Okay, yeah.
Right
Here's
here?
this to in case and I'll just fill it out over here. Okay, thank you.
So we're at the No Against Proposition 112 event. Millions of dollars have been spent by largely this group of people to try to defeat this proposition. think this is a referendum on the oil and gas industry, at least in this state, and how it interacts with our communities. Oil and gas is, in a lot of ways, the backbone of, or at least historically, one of the backbones of Colorado's industry.
If Proposition 112 were to pass, what's at stake economically are good-paying jobs, up to 147,000 jobs possibly lost over the next 11 years.
It would create half-mile setbacks in every direction around anything that's considered vulnerable, basically preventing new oil and gas development in more than 80% of non-federal land here in Colorado.
So I think this is one of the biggest issues our industry faces in the coming years. It's really incumbent upon our industry to make sure that communities and neighborhoods understand our commitment to safety and to develop this resource cleaner and better and safer than anywhere in the country.
Talking with some of the industry folks who are here, they acknowledge that even if they win tonight and this proposition is defeated, there are going to have to be some hard conversations within the industry of how do we prevent something like this from happening again? What do we need to do to be a better neighbor for, our state?
Do we know the numbers for 112, John? Patty, would you mind looking up 112? Do you know the numbers? I know we're not winning. The measure needed 50% to pass. We made it to 42. 16-point difference. It looks like we're losing, which is to be expected, I think, with how many millions of dollars that they had. But I was just telling someone else that this is just the beginning. I'm hoping that they'll take a closer look as to what can actually happen. It's not as safe as they think it is. Right now, I'm sad we lost, but at the same time, it's a huge win for Colorado and the awareness that we have.
All this new oil and gas is moving out of the Gulf Coast at a record-breaking pace. And that's actually led the Panama Canal to open up a whole new set of locks, basically expanding this U.S. to Asia trade route to make room for more liquefied natural gas.
We want to take care of us. Thank you for that.
Do you see any crocodiles today?
Any what?
Crocodiles.
No, I haven't seen any crocodiles.
Sometimes we get some alligators in there.
Really?
Yeah.
They go through, they want to go from the Atlantic to the Pacific,
Yes.
or vice versa?
And they don't want to pay tolls, and they go for free. We were not in an oil area, producing area until the United States discovered this shale revolution and all these techniques to extract the gas from the rocks. I would say that now we are very relevant for that particular trade between the U.S. and Asia.
What are the trends that you've seen in liquefied natural gas, or LNG, coming through the Panama Canal?
After the contracts with the Asian companies began to kick in, then we saw a lot of volumes going to South Korea, which is probably the major destination through the Panama Canal, Japan, and we see China surging and buying more and more each time. So I would say main destinations: South Korea, China, Japan. Just to give you an idea, in 2017, I think we had about 6 million tons of natural gas transiting the canal. And we haven't finished 2018 yet, but we are probably going to double that volume this year.
The path of American oil and gas now stretches all over the world. Outside of North America, most of the biggest buyers are all in Asia. That includes South Korea, China, Japan, and India. That's where U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry helped close a deal to send Cheniere's natural gas for the next 20 years. So here's why these global gas shipments really matter. Long term, the world's top polluters have to curb their greenhouse gases to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Moving to renewable energy could do that. And supporters of natural gas say that can be a sort of bridge to that renewable shift. But natural gas is still a fossil fuel, and it still puts out these heat-trapping gases. So if the world is going to hit its targets for curbing greenhouse gases, that bridge can't be too long. So now the countries trying to cut their greenhouse gases have a choice. Either a fast transition to renewable energy or the natural gas bridge.
As you can see, the 4 arms that is tilted toward the cargo.
So there are 4 arms connecting the jetty to the tanker, 3 for the liquid and 1 for the vapor.
Yes.
Here, tankers are coming in, LNG is coming off the tankers.
We can say 3 to 4 cargo comes in a month.
Is that more than it used to be?
Yeah. Unloading activities also started. You can see the decoupling the bolts.
Yeah.
We are reached at the right time.
We're here at the right time, yeah. They're right in the process of disconnecting the arms. They've got 2 of them off.
This is the first time I think any media person is capturing this moment.
Really?
Yeah.
So after the liquefied natural gas is taken off the tanker, it's put into your tanks here,
Yes.
you turn it back into a gas and push it out to the rest of India,
yes.
basically.
Basically, we are sending a gas. We are unloading LNG, liquefied natural gas, and we are sending gas to GAIL network.
So once it's converted back into a gas, then it's ready to be sent through the pipelines to cities across the country.
Yes.
So it was about a 24-hour process to get the liquefied natural gas off the tanker.
Yes.
Now that's done.
The activity is overrun now. The next shift will be coming after a week.
India is buying American oil and gas and carrying it across the country through pipelines. But the government here is also doing something the US government isn't doing. It's laying the groundwork for this huge buildup of solar energy. Basically, India is betting on renewables for its future, while the US is building out all this new fossil fuel production. But India has a population of 1.3 billion people and growing, and it needs a quick alternative to the coal that's polluting its largest cities. So both the US government and the global fossil fuel industry is offering up natural gas as a solution.
When it comes to power, electricity, 67% electricity that we produce is coming from coal.
Wow, so
67%.
So 2/3 of the electricity in
Is
India
coming
comes
from
from
coal. Yes. Natural gas in big cities in India is emerging as an alternative. We are moving in the direction of LNG, which means that we're going to use LNG to fire power plants. We need LNG to run buses. public transport system in cities like Delhi. Delhi is already running only on natural gas. It's CNG, compressed natural gas.
So the buses that we see running around here.
All buses, all three-wheelers, all taxis are running on natural gas.
And more likely than not, that's imported natural gas.
Yeah. Let me put it this way. Today, when you look at India's energy mix, it's roughly 90% fossil fuel. 67% of electricity that we consume is coming from coal. We know that by 2040, 2050, probably 50% of our energy requirements are going to be met by renewables.
In a sense, it seems like natural gas is becoming the last fossil fuel, basically.
Yes, yes.
Would you say that's
I think that's the right way to look at it.
So India is preparing for a sort of renewable future right
Yes.
now. And how is it doing that? How is it incentivizing renewables?
You see, a very good question. I think, we are a more complex country, but we are very blessed when it comes to solar. India has got the most aggressive, most ambitious renewable energy plan, in the world. Most ambitious. Government has taken the lead. So I expect that in 10 years from now, this revolution, which is a grassroots revolution, the solar revolution, is going to surprise the world.
That's very different than what we're seeing from U.S. political leaders right now. Has India noticed the shift from the U.S. and how it's approaching energy production and how it's approaching setting goals on emissions curbing and that sort of thing?
Very good question. You see, we used to look at the U.S., but the developments in the U.S. the last few years have been a bit disappointing. For instance, shale is a game changer. The fact is, shale contaminates.
The air and the water.
And the air and the water and the earth. It contaminates. When it comes to climate deal, Paris climate deal, the U.S. has moved out of it. And India is extremely disappointed what President Trump has done. We are committed to it simply because we care for the health of our people.
In recent years, the U.S. has really doubled down on oil and gas production. India is buying some of it. But what contrast do you see there between how the U.S. is building its energy future and how India is building its energy future?
You see, let's not forget one thing. Energy, ever since the First World War, is 90% politics. You can't take politics out of energy. So there are no black and white pictures. When I say that, I'm disappointed with what the US is doing in terms of like pulling out of the climate deal or shale gas, contaminating air, water, earth and everything. But at the same time, the fact that US is able to produce more oil, more natural gas is good for us, good for emerging economies like India. But at the same time, in terms of carbon emissions and all that, is bad. But as I said, that, so there is no black and white answer. So it's a mixed answer. India needs every single source of energy you can think of. India needs every source of energy you have available today, and India is going to need every source of energy which is going to come on the table in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whether it is energy from space, or is energy from gravity, or is energy from just sheer thoughts, or whatever.
We saw American oil and gas drilled in Texas, processed at the Gulf Coast, shipped through the Panama Canal, and burned off in India. But the path of fossil fuels doesn't end there. The pipelines and the terminals that the industry is building out all over the world are meant to take oil and gas use well into the 21st century. Emissions are put into the atmosphere and global temperatures keep rising, which means the next step in this process has the biggest impact.
So there's a clear trend of warming around the world, over the ocean and over land. Tropical storms and hurricanes feed on heat from the oceans. And as the ocean is warming, we see increased energy available for tropical storms to grow in size, but also in intensity of rainfall. So as we are moving towards a warmer world, we expect more intense storms. One key consequences of global warming is sea level rise. So through thermal expansion, warm water takes more space than cold water. If emissions are not reduced fast, we could see a 1 meter to 2 meter increase
in the sea level by the end of this century without climate actions. By 2100, with a middle-of-the-road emissions scenario for greenhouse gases emissions, we are looking at over 150 million people being refugees, climate refugees, due to their land and their homes being now covered by the ocean.
Bangladesh is identified as one of the most affected country of climate change related events. In Bangladesh, already 4.7 million people has been displaced due to effect of climate change. From 2011 till 2050, 16 to 26 million people will be migrating due to coastal erosion, riverbank erosion, flood, drought, and cyclone. Our research found that 60% of those who move internally due to climate change or otherwise, they all come to Dhaka. So when you think of these many people coming into Dhaka, the main problem here is the government or the state doesn't have places to accommodate them. Then their living condition, if you think, and their personal security, their family security, all these things are.
Name of this neighborhood is, you can tell it Rupnagar Duaripara, not exactly downtown, it's a suburb.
So, Sadiq, can you tell me a little bit about this neighborhood?
Most of the people are living here. They are basically rickshaw puller or some sort of lower income job they are doing.
So it could be construction, it could be
yes, it could
any
be.
kind of manual labor work?
Yes, manual labor work.
Okay. So it's a lot of low-income people. A lot of them moved here for environmental reasons.
Yes. This sort of neighborhood you will find in many parts of the city. Number of people living in the slum in Bangladesh is increased by 370 something %.
So the number of people living in these neighborhoods in Dhaka has grown almost 4 times what it was over 15 years.
Yes.
What are the big factors behind so many more people moving into these neighborhoods?
Basically unemployment in their own hometown. Her name is Kohinoor. She, along with her family, came here from coastal district, Bagerhat.
Okay. So how long have you lived in this neighborhood?
She and her family are...
Salt water had basically covered the land that they were on. And so
their agricultural lands are totally barren now. There is no agricultural production. No agricultural production means all their living means has been destroyed. That is why they are now here, like many others.
একটা ফসল হইলো অনেক কষ্ট হয়েছে আর বাকি মিষ্টি পানির যতে ধান বীজ কিনে আনছে হয় না আবার কিনছে আবার রুইছে আবার কিনছে আবার রুইছে ওই চলতেছে
a lot of the countries contributing the least to climate change will feel the biggest impacts. But climate change will be felt by everyone, including the top emitters of greenhouse gases. Sea level rise might seem like a slow-moving threat, but scientists point to another effect of warmer oceans, one that's already being felt in the U.S.
Hurricane Maria,
Hurricane Florence,
Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Michael, one of the worst hurricanes in American history, the worst hurricane to ever hit the Florida Panhandle.
More sirens.
Yeah, I hear that all night long.
So, this is where you work?
Yeah. Yeah, this is my job.
When did you find it like this? You walk over after the...
But we knew it was coming, but we didn't know how extent the damage was going to be. And when I came up here, this is what we get. I had another driver, one of my other drivers, he was driving with me. He had to leave his trailer because his trailer got blown away. He come up here, him and his wife, they go to the back. The whole building on the backside collapses on them. So they hurried up and got out and went in their truck and sat down and stayed there the whole night.
Well, how long have you lived here?
All my life. I'm 45 years old.
Is this as bad as you've seen it? This
is the worst I've seen it. This is the first time we ever had a storm this strong and this catastrophic. This is the worst one I've been through in my lifetime so far.
Hurricane Michael hit 3 days ago, and still for almost 100 miles around, there's no cell service, no electricity. People are without gas. We still don't know what the true death count is. And all along this section of the Panhandle of Florida, there's just devastation.
Sir! I'm holding, what's up? I'm gonna check second floor, see if it's clear you. Got it, copy. 1700. I don't see anything. What do you think? I understand that.
It was scary, horrible. The wind and the rain, I thought we were gonna be gone. It came so quick. People were just so thankful for us to be able to open because they weren't prepared for this storm. They're saying we may not get electricity for like a month.
And I mean, what do you think it's going to be like a couple, 2-3 weeks from now when there's not electricity?
I don't know.
There's so much to deal with between the destruction and the loss of electricity. Some people are trying to rebuild what they have. Some people kind of just have to cut their losses and move. What kind of reaction have you heard from people on both sides of that?
It's really going to be bad. The 2 hospitals in Panama City are going to be down for 2 or 3 months. And a lot of people here in Gulf County work there and in Panama City. And it's going to be devastating because they're not going to have a job. So they're going to have to move, or I don't know.
If we trust the scientific consensus, in this century we're on a path to 150 million climate refugees, 13 million just in the US, with jobs or homes destroyed, whether that's by sea level rise or more powerful wildfires or storms. And most of that climate change comes from how we produce energy.
Climate has just kind of taken a back seat to all of this. This is coming at a time when, you know, we are supposed to be trying as a global society to reach zero emissions. Meanwhile, you're building all this infrastructure to support decades of natural gas and oil development, and that pushes us way past 2050. So we're kind of going in one direction, and all the science tells us to go in the opposite direction.
There's a wake-up call that needs to happen. It seems that we've lost momentum. The energy system that has brought us to where we are today, that has given us a lot of improvements to our quality of life, is probably not the system we want to rely on to make sure that our kids and our grandkids have a planet they can live in down the road and for the